Hey everyone, welcome to the Maker Mistaker podcast, where we love to have deep, eye-opening, and mind-bending discussions about life. And this is episode 4. Today we're talking about building habits, starting them, keeping them, quitting them, you name it. I'm your host, Jeff Finley, and with me is George Coghill. Say hello, George.
Hello.
Hey, so how are you doing? I mean, it's been a month since we had our last podcast, and what's been going on in your world?
Well, a big chunk of my past month has been visiting family. I went out to visit my brother and his family out in California, so I was out there for pretty long. Actually, it's something that's almost a perfect segue into our topic for the week, because I was out there for 2 weeks, and being out of your element in your routines and your habits for 2 weeks is an interesting experience. But yeah, that's been basically what I've been up to. So, and then, getting back into the swing of things once I was back home. So what about you? What's been going on with you?
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar boat too. I mean, with the holidays coming up, there's it just throws a total wrench in a lot of my routines. I'm staying up later, not getting up for my morning routines that I like to do. And also I've been burnt out on a lot of my habits and a lot of my routine. And in my, I have a weekly coaching call with a sort of a personal development coach, life coach. We kind of trade services, so we both kind of coach each other on our goals and stuff. And that's kind of cool. And one of the things that she told me was to just basically shut down all of my goals or all of my routines until the first of the year. Basically you don't have to do this. Because I would kind of always beat myself up, because I always, every single day was like, all right, I got to do what I've been doing,
Right.
Got to keep up with it. And if I don't, I'm going to slip back into where I used to be, or I'll go be depressed again, or something bad will happen, or you stop exercising, I'm going to get fat. You stop meditating, I'm going to get all stressed out and depressed again,
I hear you, man. I do the same thing. I mean, one of the interesting things I read, I don't remember now if we talked about this last time, but that really plays into perfectionism and the procrastination situations, because it's basically you get into this thing where you feel like you have to do it every single time, or it doesn't count, or it's, like you said, it's not gonna stick, or you're gonna fall back. And that's actually something I work on sometimes. Is to, like your development coach said, is I force myself to miss days, because I'm like, you have to get used to missing days. You know what I mean? You have to, because it's going to happen. You can't avoid it. And being on that trip was a big part of that. I was like, because I was really determined when I went out there. I'm like, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to get up. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make this happen. And then, I see those guys once a year. So at this rate, because he's got she'll be 3 years old in about a couple of weeks, but I have a new niece, and I wanted to spend more time with them, and I didn't want to be like, oh no, I got to work on this, and I'm doing this and writing this down. I'm like, no, I'm out there to visit. So I kind of just forced myself to say, you know what, for the next 2 weeks you do what you can, and if it doesn't fit into the day, that's okay too.
Yeah, right. So let's just talk about the basics of habit building. Well, for me, I didn't really think about actually what building habits meant until I read Zen Habits and subsequently The Power of Habit. Some basically people talking about building habits. Before that, I was definitely like a productivity nerd. I was always kind of, I guess procrastinating by looking up how to be more productive and finding new apps and tools. And before that, there was like Life Hacker and lifestyle design and all this type of, ways that you can sort of hack yourself, and of course there's like the exercise habit and diets and stuff like that though. But I mean, when we started getting into building habits, it was about, say you start recognizing some of your bad habits, and then you want to try to cut those out, like smoking, or maybe, just an example in my case where like I would watch TV at night, and then I would want to have a snack, like a bowl of cereal or something like that. And it was like when the time would come to turn the TV on, it's like I would definitely get triggered, and I would feel like the craving like instantly happen. And then just here's another example. Like anytime that you're bored for a split second, you like want to look at your phone. Does that ever happen to you, George?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, not necessarily the TV thing, but I mean the phone. I mean, everybody seems to be completely under that spell. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can call it a spell. It's so funny because I remember reading this book called Gamification, whatever. I don't know. It was all about gamifying your app. And it's all about basically trying to get your users addicted to your app. So they're using science and psychology to do everything possible to get you hooked as soon as possible. And video games are doing that more and more with all of the achievements and you start playing, you play like level 0 and you're like, it's really, really easy to start off and you start to feel like I can learn this game really easily, but it's, so you start getting hooked on it. And it basically everyone is trying to get you to build a habit out of their app, out of their ecosystem, Facebook. And it's definitely been ingrained in my life, and I've tried quitting it, but it's so hard to quit. I don't know what's more addicting, Facebook or smoking. I mean, you're a former smoker, so what do you think about that?
Well, I'm a former smoker and I'm also an introvert. So Facebook, Facebook holds no interest to me. I mean, I'm on there because that's just, it's almost like having an email address these days. So I do use it, but I never got really addicted to it. I mean, I got a little bit worked up over, Twitter. That was more on that, but I think it was more of the habit of like, or I wouldn't even say the habit, or more the compulsion to just constantly check it. Like you said, it was the same thing as the phone, like just default in any little lull in the mental stream, just like, oh, I'm going to go see what's on Twitter. And then you get lost in there for 5 minutes, but you do that all day and you break up your concentration. I mean, smoking, I mean, that's a whole, I guess people call smoking a habit. I mean, that's just something I could touch on. What about you? Did you ever smoke?
No, I never picked up the smoking habit. Never
Good for
smoked.
you.
Never smoked once.
Oh, that's good for you, man. I mean, I got a buddy who started smoking like 4 years ago. I'm like, dude, you waited till they became super expensive to start smoking? Like, what are you doing? Like, that's the most ridiculous thing ever. But I mean, when I started, it was, less than $1 a pack. It was
wow,
definitely priced to get you addicted. But I'll tell you, man, I got a buddy who's trying to quit, and I did use an electronic cigarette for about at least a year and a half, maybe a little bit longer. And I, was talking to him. I gave him all my equipment because he was asking me questions, and I'm like, look, I just don't want this stuff anymore. I don't need it. And it worked. It helped me, and I wanted to give it to him if it helped him. But we were talking about relapses because he definitely is. I don't know if it's on the wagon or off the wagon, but whatever. He went back and started smoking again. I told him the biggest, and going back to your thing with the TV and the snacking and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's really a big factor when I look back for the smoking was the setting. It was environmental. It was social. There was, these cues, these triggers that, like, I even find myself now, like, I don't even think about smoking anymore. I have no desire to do it. But when I am somewhere, say like at a bar or I'm at a party with a bunch of friends who still smoke, and you're like literally like the only person who's not, it's very interesting because I can watch or I can observe my body and my mind want to have a cigarette. And right when the first time it happened, I realized, I'm like, oh, well, I don't have any cravings for the cigarettes or the tobacco or the nicotine. It's all this wanting to feel comfortable in the situation and go back to some familiarity. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a big thing for me, and that's part of what I did when I was trying to quit smoking. I was also just, I was cutting back on a lot of different things just to kind of let the dirt settle and see where things ended up. But I cut back on, I used to go to the bar. I don't know, not a lot, but I mean, regularly enough. And I stopped doing that. And that was a huge part of like being able to not smoke because there wasn't temptation of like these repetitive behaviors that you would do. Get a drink, go outside, have a cigarette. Everyone else is doing it. Someone lights one up. You light one up after they do. And it gets into this whole like cue and response and trigger cycle that is tough to break if you keep yourself in those environments. And I've found like speaking of, what you said with the TV, like really almost anything that you do you can apply these kind of concepts to and just say, if I, if I interrupt this pattern, and one of the interruptions can be, I don't go to the places where I usually smoke or I associate with smoking or whatever the habit is you don't want to do. Staying away from those situations is a huge factor because you associate the smells and the sights and the sounds and the activities. All that stuff is like, it's the familiarity of it.
Yeah, and you don't even think that it's like a trigger of a particular habit because there's probably dozens of different habits that you're performing all in the same environment, just like little ticks that you might do around certain friends or certain things that you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all, I do agree with you when it comes down to sort of feeling comfortable in the situation, because maybe when we're both of us, are kind of introverted at heart, and if we're in a social setting, it's almost like we feel a little anxiety, and especially if everyone else is smoking, that like if you had something to do with your hands or if you had a cigarette, it would just make you feel more at ease and comfortable. And coffee is the same thing, is what does it for me. Like if I'm in a meeting with somebody, I can't, it's almost hard to not have coffee with me, to have a meeting with somebody. Or it's just like you're in a coffee shop, got to get my coffee. And, even if it's my third one of the day or something, it's like, it's just, the trigger is there, the being in that environment.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like you said, having that, having that thing to ease the anxiety, especially if you're someone who's not like a social person. And I totally can not only agree and commiserate with you on that, but I've actually started when I noticed it, what I started doing was I decided to start doing the opposite. I'm like, because I realized what was going on with these behaviors to ease any social anxiety or anything like that was what you were basically doing was trying to hide. You were trying to avoid the situation, the reality, the immediacy of what was going on. So it's like, as obscure as this might sound, I really think even having a cigarette is a way to kind of, because you got something else to do. You're occupied. So, you can, someone might not want to, oh, yeah, he's over there smoking, or, you have an excuse to walk away. I mean, that was a big one for me, on the introvert side of things that was an excuse to walk outside and just be by myself for 5 minutes. Cause sometimes you just need that little, miniature battery recharge by yourself if you're out.
Yeah.
Right. So I just, like I said, I noticed that I was doing things like having a beer, like I would go to the bar sometimes and I would have beers I didn't want just because like you said, I wanted to have something in my hand. It would be like that third cup of coffee. I would be like, I don't need any more beer. I'm already more drunk than I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And it's the end of the night. It's like, it's late and I want to go to bed, and I'm getting one because I'm like, what am I going to do? Just not have a beer? I'm at the bar, and I'm like, and like I said, I went out of my way to see, like, to put myself in those situations just and to not do what is the easy, the comfortable, the anxiety easing option. Especially if it involves a chemical or like a behavior that's not like something I would do if I wasn't there. And it's surprisingly easy to get over that stuff if you just do it. It's like the immersion therapy kind of stuff. Like if you just don't use those crutches, pretty quickly you just realize like, oh, I don't even really I could totally do without that. So very interesting experiment. I'm still playing with it, but I mean, it was something to try out, and I was surprised how quickly I got used to it.
Yeah, what you said about the discomfort and trying to hide, like that was so key. I feel like, because how many people look at their phone, when they're
Totally.
it's like they don't want to be seen. They want to hide, so it's like, hey, I'm on my phone. I don't have to actually, there's no obligation. If it's weird too, because I don't know if the smartphone caused this, but like when you don't have a phone, it's almost like you're saying, hey, I'm available to be bothered. Talk to me. I'm just, or if like, if I'm sitting there like waiting for like my haircut, or anytime I'm waiting in line, and I'll consciously try not to go on my phone where I see a lot of people are. So I'll just stand there, and I'm just like, wow, I'm just totally present, like kind of observing and watching. Do people think I look weird because I'm not like busying myself with some distraction.
Right. I do the same. That's been a thing for me too, is like consciously not great. Like I might check my email real quick, but I won't sit there and be on the phone, if I'm out and like you said, waiting in line or something, because it's just like this default. What I don't like about it, and again, this goes back to I'll go back. I mean, I don't know why smoking is such a good negative example, or I guess just example for habits or bad habits. But
Oh yeah, totally.
it's just a lot of the cigarette. Like I had a guy when I was first trying to quit smoking. This is before this time that actually stuck with me. But I was talking to this guy about it, and he was like, "If you only have a cigarette when you want one, then you can quit smoking." And I'm like, "Well, no, I'll just have one all the time." Then he's like, "No," he's like, "You don't actually want about 80% of the cigarettes you have. You do them out of complete, just like there's nothing else to do. Like grabbing a cigarette used to be the same thing as checking your smartphone for me. It's like if there's a little lull in something, grab the phone, or have a cigarette. Nowadays it's like, oh, something, if there's 8 seconds of something that's not occupying your attention, people grab their phones, and it's like people are like, oh no, I'm just doing it because there was nothing else to do. I'm like, yeah, next time I come to meet up with you for dinner, I'm going to come 20 minutes late, and don't pick your phone up at all during that time. I triple dog dare you, because I don't think a lot of people can do that anymore. It's like
Nope.
and I'm consciously trying to not, or to not do that, to, like you said, if I'm somewhere waiting, I'm just like, you know what, I'm going to watch what's going on here, because it's almost like you're on drugs when you do that, because you're so used to being on the phone yourself, and then B, like you said, everyone else is doing it. So you do feel a little bit out of place. And by doing that, by not doing any of those behaviors, it's definitely an altered state of consciousness. So
Yeah, that's an awesome way of having an altered state of consciousness. Just don't go on your phone and be and be present while and observe, especially when you're waiting. Anytime you're waiting, and that's the culture that the smartphone app developers and stuff like that we have built for ourselves. I mean, you and me, we're in the creative industry, so it's like, I know plenty of people who are app developers, and I've read books on how to make things addicting and stuff, and I've tried to do it to my own websites, for our customers. Of course, I'm kind of suck at it, but that's another discussion. But now I kind of feel like, man, like everyone's competing to try to get for the attention. Like everyone needs the attention. So it's like, you want your app to be top of mind when someone has a lull in their boredom. And like, we created that. Like, why did we create that? And people say like, well, before smartphones, it was like the newspaper. Have you seen that like internet meme?
Mm-mm.
It was like, people before smartphones, like, were friendlier and not strangers with each other. I don't even know what he said. Something catchy, but it showed a bunch of people on a subway with newspapers in front of their face. So like they're just still distracting themselves, or a book, they got their nose in a book, because I mean, I think those are good cues, to like, I don't really want to be bothered by strangers. So you sit there, especially if you're like on a plane or on a train, or really, I mean, you can put your headphones in, put your nose in a book, and you kind of set a visual cue to other people, letting people know that you're not really available. But then if I'm sitting next to someone and I have nothing to occupy myself and I'm just sitting there, I feel like people are waiting for me to say something to them, or like something's about to happen. I'm attentive. It's kind of awkward.
it's awkward to be attentive. I like what you said earlier about being present is an altered state of consciousness. It's like, but it is weird. I mean, it's weird to see that, it's almost like the default that people want to be, close themselves off to, the outside, potential outside intrusions, where it's like, how often does that happen anyways? How often do people actually just come up to you and start talking? I mean, maybe it happens to other people and not to me, but I mean, I don't really think people need to, I don't know if the phone or newspaper or a book isn't even a necessary thing to keep people away, but who knows? It's a strange phenomenon. I don't know too much about that side of things. I'm not I'm not a Subway guy. I'm not a coffee shop guy. So, you know what I mean? I'm not around those situations too much.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's really because to keep people away, because I think anybody would kind of appreciate someone saying hi to them. It's like
Well,
someone wants to have a stranger says, "Hey, how's it going?" It's like a surprise. I think most people would probably, think it's kind of cool, kind of an unexpected kindness. Of course, if someone asks them a question, hey, can I get directions to this place or whatever, or I think those typical conversations that you would have with a stranger are usually pretty good. I mean, unless it's like someone's asking you for money or for some bizarre thing, but it's usually like if you're present and available. I think that's one thing. Okay, putting your nose in your phone in the presence of strangers, that's a default habit for most of us, and also especially for socially anxious people, because we kind of feel like obligated to have important conversations with people when we might not know what to say. So we're like, I'm just going to plug in. But if
well,
oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, that's totally true, but I think going back to the habit topic is that's what these things are, is they're habits, and that's one of the things, when you mentioned earlier talking to strangers, that's one of the things that I've been working on myself is to go out of my way, like I try to get hikes in at the local park near me. I mean, I try to go every day if I can, but if I'm out there, it's easy for me to bury myself in the phone or put my headphones on or whatever. But I make a point of like smiling and saying hi, and just it doesn't have to be a conversation, but you can have a couple sentences with somebody, and part of it is because I think I do have this habit of not doing that, and finding a way out of it. You know what I mean? Finding a way to block myself from doing it. And I think that's a habit that, I mean, and that gets into habits that you don't even, you mentioned earlier, all these like myriad of tiny habits you don't realize you're doing. And I think that's another one where you think like, I don't really want to be bothered, but do you, or is it just a habit of shutting yourself off from interacting with people, and that what you really want is the familiarity of the behavior, and it's not necessarily that you don't want to be bothered. You just want things to be the way they usually are when you're out there. So, like I said, I've been just trying to throw a monkey wrench in my own engine, and mixing it up and see what happens. And what you said was really what happens is most people are happy. Like when you say hi, you're just saying hi to somebody when you're, walking past them on the trail or whatever. Usually that people smile back, and they're more than glad to stop and have even a tiny little chat. So it's like they're, and they're not looking to intrude on anything. They know you're out there for the same reason, that they are. They're just out there for a walk, but you can stop and say hi to somebody. And to me, I think it does enhance people's day. I mean, if people do it to me, it's it goes back to the golden rule. Like when people do it for me, that makes me feel better. So I figured,
Yeah.
might as well do it, do it myself and instigate it, because sometimes being the instigator is all it takes. So sometimes people, they're just like, oh, I don't know if I should say hi, I don't know if I should do it. And if you just say, I'm going to do it, and break the ice that way, other people, a lot of people appreciate that, because you've opened up that awkward situation, and something that they would want.
Yeah, I think too, like when we talk about, okay, where you're putting your nose in your app in, or you're distracting yourself away from sort of stranger interaction. But like, what about when people do that in the presence of like their family or their friends, or even they're out to lunch or dinner on a date or something like that, and then it's like they're constantly checking their phone, even when they're in the middle of a conversation with somebody, or like that's how like sort of insidious these habits can get.
Well, I mean, this stuff all gets into, I mean, and this gets into, from my reading, really the core of where these habits come from. And it comes from rewards, and it comes from the dopamine, the dopamine response in your brain. And, what people have done, and I think I think I mentioned this the last podcast, but I cut out all the alarms and alerts and pop-ups and most of all that stuff on my phone and my computer, mostly because what they find when they study this stuff, what they found was that people were getting these tiny little rewards all the time from their, checking their phone. And there might be, and the other thing with the dopamine is dopamine likes the randomness of the rewards. So the phone is perfect for that because you may have an email, you may not. If you have email, one of them might be a good one, it might not. So it's almost like a gambling thing. And you get so hooked on all and on constantly having this little tiny perk. It's almost like having a tiny little cup of coffee or espresso or something, or a hit off a cigarette or something. But it's like it's this persistent, repetitive habit that people can't stop doing. I mean, it's like it's a habit they don't even realize they have, and it's because because it makes them feel good. And what they've done is they've trained themselves to feel good from that response that the phone gets, which is something I've consciously been working against, because I think that's a super dangerous, like you said, these apps, especially on the phones, these apps it's not an accident that these things are happening to people. People are doing this consciously and implementing these principles with full knowledge of what they do. So you got to be extra vigilant on your end to make sure that, not only are you by default, just because of the information hit, the dopamine hit from the potential of some new information, that in itself is enough. But then you have apps that, outside of the email and stuff like that, that are specifically designed to give you that little bolt of reward or the jolt of reward. And that stuff's dangerous. I mean, it's not dangerous in the sense that, there was actually a thing I saw online was a clip from a recent South Park episode where they go into this a little bit, and they basically said that yes, you can get addicted to anything. I mean, really, if it's that's the society we live in today, especially with the internet, is that everything is it's like the cocaine version of everything. It's been freebased down, so there's no this immediate gratification. There's no delay. There's no working for it. You get you get an experience that's 1,000 times what it is in natural environment. So, I know that the internet's not necessarily a natural environment, but let's just say like in the past, you wouldn't associate with that many people and that many different ideas and have this many choices of information, even 10 years ago, and having all of this stuff, like just this overload is, well, that's something too that gets, and I don't mean to hop thoughts here, but that's another thing too, is that having so many choices also overloads your willpower too. Too many choices, willpower erodes, and you end up making poor decisions. And that's something that they do on purpose too. They know that that's how that works. Department stores function on this big time. That's why there's so much stuff in a department store. It's because they know that you will eventually get so overwhelmed that you just you stop being frugal, and you just start buying stuff, and you don't think about it anymore, because that literally is what happens. So it's one of those things where you just got to be careful that these habits are coming up because of the dopamine reward system, and it's being consciously manipulated. And even if it's not, it's still something that we are experiencing on a much more concentrated level than we ever have in the past.
Yeah. So about dopamine, it's funny because, dopamine is for the listeners, I mean, it's a chemical released in your brain that makes you feel really good. It's your reward system that lets you know, hey, this is something worth repeating. This is something worth doing. And, you get those little rushes of good feelings and rushes of inspiration and stuff like that. It's mostly has a lot to do with immediate gratification, immediate satisfaction. It's hard to get dopamine rush from long-term goals. like I read a good quote today. It says, discipline is when is about doing. Okay, I'm see if I can get this right. Okay, discipline is about not doing what you. Okay, discipline is about.
I think I got it.
Yeah,
discipline is about doing not doing what you want to, and doing what you don't want to.
Well, it's doing what. No, that's close. Okay, I'll edit this out. All right.
Right. No, this is good. Leave it in.
It was like it was like discipline is not doing what you want to, or what why is it so hard for me to remember? It was a good quote. It was about like comparing what you want right now in the moment to what you want in the future. So it's like
Right.
basically it's about not doing what feels good, doing what's right. You've heard that one before. Like
Well,
so
I
if you're
mean,
faced with a decision about like what should I do right now, well, this gives me this immediate gratification. But then you also have all these long term goals that you've set for yourself. Like I want to exercise more. Well, right now, I mean, sitting on the couch watching Breaking Bad feels really good to me right now. So isn't that what my body's trying to tell me it wants to do? You know?
well, one
And
of the, oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I mean I'm done with that thought.
Well, I mean, one of the things that one of the first big aha moments for me with all of this stuff was when I was an article that I read online, and we should probably put some of these in the show notes
Yeah.
if we can dig them up. I have this one saved somewhere, but they did a study and they found that people, when they make decisions, they basically, your brain is basically designed or structured, or the way it is. Let's put it that way. It sees you in the future, your future self, you as 10 years down the road, as a stranger, as somebody else, as not you. So the reason it's more difficult for you to make long-term decisions that are healthy or beneficial, especially because a lot of those require sacrifices in the present. They require the present you to have to go without, or to do something it's not all that interested in doing. But the way your brain perceives it is that you're doing it for somebody else, not for yourself. So that's why you're even less likely to do it, because you're like, oh, this isn't even for, what do I get out of this? And you literally don't perceive this long-term benefit as, something that you're going to get, or you're going to benefit from. So it's an interesting concept when you realize that, because that's when you get into a lot of this stuff, a lot of times people, I think we touched on this last episode, where people identify with maybe not, maybe I've just been thinking about this all week, but you identify with habits and behaviors and traits and things like that, but they're not necessarily you. And I think this is one of those cases where you realize, oh, well, if your brain is structured, if the way the brain is structured, it results in you having this experience. Up until that point, I had kind of always just thought like, well, obviously, like you said, doesn't my body want to do what's healthy for me? Or, maybe I don't want to do this. And then you realize like, this has nothing to do with you. Like you're identifying with something that's like built into the machinery. This isn't you or your behavior, or I'm sorry, your personality or something. This is completely something that's like literally built into, there's the only way, there's not even a way around it. The way around it is to just know that, you can't get rid of it. And that when it comes up, you just have to consciously be aware of that and say, okay, well, I'm going to have to work past this because I know what's going on here. But it's interesting how you can get derailed on trying to break a bad habit or establish a good one by, identifying with behaviors that aren't, that are in conflict with what you think you want, because you think, oh, well, that's just not me. And it's like, nope, has nothing. It's not you at all. It has nothing to do with you at all. It's completely impersonal. So
Yeah, it's like these habits that kind of come from Facebook and apps, and basically cultural like influences. It's kind of like they hijack your reward system. So it's like you're kind of unconsciously following the habits that somebody else wants you to follow, and they work better than your own goals and habits that you can put for yourself. Like, I want to exercise more, but like everywhere, there's so much influence in all of the other habits that you do, that it's so hard to remove yourself from those habits and actually put something as addictive as Facebook or smoking a cigarette or whatever, and making that put that towards your exercise goal. Like, there's been things that have tried, but in the end, it's like, it's hard to unplug yourself from those synthetic reward systems that you've I guess sort of put yourself into. Like, you got into it and then you got sucked in. I mean, how many people have told me that they never were going to go on Facebook, and then they just decided, whatever, and then they're on it all the time. Or
Well,
they won't do their long term goals, or they won't, like, they say they're going to write a book or something, and then they never write their book, but they have plenty of TV watching time.
right. I mean, and the TV and the book thing definitely plays into that whole, you in the future as being a different person. But I mean, the Facebook thing, I think, ties into that behavioral environmental thing I was mentioning earlier, where if you're in the situation, because that's the thing is you get on Facebook, and what do you hear from people if you're not on Facebook? Everybody's on Facebook, though. That's where everybody. That's where you don't get invited to things if you're not on Facebook, because that's where people invite people to things, and that's where like everybody knows everything before you see them. Like I like the fact that when I see some of my friends, I don't know what the hell's going on with them. When I see them, we actually can have a conversation because I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what you're doing because you don't post a million times. And even if you did, I'm not reading it. So we have something to talk about. And it's like, but when everybody is quote unquote is on Facebook, that's, it's no different than what I said earlier about being at the bar and wanting to have a cigarette because everybody else was doing it. So you get into these, like you said, you're outsourcing yourself to these other people and letting them just, dictate, and it's not like they're doing this consciously. It's just that you're not making any conscious decisions for yourself. And it's, that's another habit that I'm trying to establish, is to be more vigilant on that front as well, because that's I think it was Mark Twain, or I don't know, it was somebody famous that said you're basically the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And it's like, I've seen that happen. I've seen myself pick up bad habits and traits, and vice versa, and pick up good ones too. But I've seen, I don't know if I'm more susceptible to it or I'm just more aware of it because it's me, but I feel like I am more susceptible to it. So I got to be more conscious of those situations. To be honest, most of the bad habits I've picked up were social, behavioral, environmental, fitting in kind of, I smoked because everybody else did. I don't think I would have smoked, had I not been around a bunch of people that smoked. I think I picked it up because I wanted to fit in, and I think that's a huge, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm an adult, that stuff doesn't affect me. And that's a bunch of BS. It totally affects everybody for the rest of their lives. It's like fitting in that's another hardwired part of being a human being, is that we're social animals, and it's you're wired to be, to want to desire to be part of the pack, and it's a hard thing to overcome. And if the pack's doing a bunch of stuff that's not good for it, you're still going to want to do those things because you're wired to go along with the crowd.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we should transition, or not necessarily transition, but let's talk about how to break bad habits, because we've talked a lot about these insidious kind of habits that get in the way of what we really want to do, and the first step is really to be mindful of what things that you do that you would consider things you'd like to change. Stuff you want to stop doing, stop overeating, stop drinking, stop smoking. Stop going on social media so much, stop checking email first thing in the morning, all sorts of things that you've identified for yourself that you're like, this is probably something I should quit. So, well, before I get into that, I found that quote. It's, discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. And I think it really is key, because it's like, oh my God, because sometimes I get confused on what it is that I want, because I'm trying to read signals from my body, from my intuition, from my list of goals. It's like, I want to write my book, but right now I feel like I really want to watch this YouTube video, go down this rabbit hole, and it has nothing to do with how I said I wanted to write my book last week or last month, and you get burnt out on habits and all this kind of stuff. But we'll get into actually accomplishing good habits after this. But let's talk about breaking bad habits. And one thing that you mentioned that was key, that I'm going to list right off the bat, is changing your environment. Go into that. Mm-hmm. Go into that a little bit, George, because I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the smoking one.
Well, I don't know if there's really much more to it than what I mentioned earlier. It's just, I don't have the articles in front of me to cite, but it's basically you get into these cycles, and I forget what the exact order and what the exact terms are, but it's like, there's a cue or a trigger.
Yeah,
So you're
trigger, routine, reward.
okay, right. So, the trigger is, that would be my friends. I'm at the bar and my friend is going out for a cigarette. And then the routine is I get up off the bar stool, go outside, have a cigarette with them, and then the reward is, the cigarette or whatever. So
usually it's the social like comfort. You're kind of back into that comfort.
what's that?
It's like the social sort of fitting in and the comfort. It's like familiarity back to like
Right.
it's like a relieving of some sort of tension.
Well, there's probably like 18 different things going on
Right.
there. You know what I mean? You get the social, you get the change of scenery, you get the familiarity of because the routine stuff, what I find is a huge part is that you tend to, like, your brain isn't smart enough to know that, like, it just wants to keep doing what it's familiar with, whether it's good or bad for you. Like, it's not smart enough to like make that decision. So you actually, your body will, make you feel good if you do something that's familiar. So that's, and I guess that touches on the environmental changes. Like it is weird. I mean, we definitely talked about this last time, where when I started taking a break from just, going to the bar on a regular basis and stuff like that, I had more of an anxiety about like not doing my pattern and not being in these environments and doing the same things. That was probably more difficult than anything else. It was the breaking of the environmental routines. So I mean, that's one of the first things that you have to do is like just get over that. You know what I mean? So it's easy to say just change your environment, but for a lot of people, sometimes you can't. I mean, they can't do that. But if you can do that, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel weird. You're not going to feel like, you're going to feel, again, it's, what do I do with my hands? It's like now it's like, what do I do with my whole, everything, because you're not in that environment anymore. But what you find is that environment had a lot of signals and triggers and cues that were, reinforcing that this is where I do this bad habit. So, I mean, let's take it like, because I mean, I'm trying to think of another bad habit besides smoking that we could apply this
well,
to.
I got a couple. Like,
yeah, go ahead.
Just for like coffee, right? Like I'm in the office, and it's like there's a prime environment for just going up and getting another cup of coffee. It's like unlimited, Or like if I'm going out somewhere and say you're shopping at Target, hey, there's a Starbucks inside Target. And I was just the Giant Eagle, and there's a Starbucks inside Giant Eagle now, a grocery store. And it's like every little environment that you put yourself in, there's all sorts of triggers to go grab a cup of coffee while you shop. Or like, if you're shopping at the mall, everyone's stopping to get their latte, and that's what there's that too. So for me, while I'm in the office, there's a lot, anytime I'm like uncomfortable or bored or at the end of a task or something like that, there's this triggers of like going to get coffee. And here's another example of being in the office. Of like someone brings donuts in, someone brings in cupcakes, cake, any sort of little thing that the office brings in. Everyone's doing it. Oh, I've been trying to stay away from sweets, but like, oh my God, everyone's eating a donut and it looks so good and it smells it. It's like, this is the environment, like, how do you change that? Well, I mean, that's pretty drastic change unless you can't like exactly quit and because you didn't want donuts,
Yeah, right. I mean, it's interesting. Everything you brought up was an external thing, a drug, a food, or something like that. I was trying to think of, is there any bad habits people try to stop that are like not non-chemical or substance related? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there? I guess you could have like, I mean, like the kind of stream of consciousness, the self-talk, the way, the habit of the way you think is probably one of those.
Oh yeah. Instantly criticizing yourself or looking on the negative side of things,
Right. Yeah.
Finding the problems with people, or just like immediately thinking someone's out to get you, or like someone's thinking bad about you or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Because the reason I brought that up is I was trying to get away from because like you said that, with the coffee and stuff like that, those things, sometimes you can't avoid all that stuff, but the stuff that's internal that you have a little bit more, because I always lean towards the Stoic philosophers, and it's like approach these things, with with the things that you have control over, the things that you can make a change in. And a lot of times, like you said, you can't quit your job just because people like to bring in donuts. It's like that's not going to happen. So, what I was trying to think of some bad habits that we could talk about that are more like where the environment is in your control, where you or where the habit itself isn't an external thing. It's something that's because I mean, like what else? Because like not exercising isn't a bad habit. You know what I mean? That's the opposite. That's a good habit that you're not doing. So
Well, there's procrastination, maybe. I mean, that's kind of a bad habit, or like sleeping in, like showing up
yeah,
late to everything.
yeah, those are good ones. Those are good ones. So yeah, because I'm trying to wrap my head more around like how can we expand this a little bit more to
Hmm.
not just smoking, not just coffee and stuff like that. Because I'm trying to think of how the environmental cues would play into that. I really do think though that it's we get into these routines, and that's one of the things at least in my situation, I found that the more I I don't get stuck in routines and old routines, or the more flexible or more willing I am to try something new or to do something new, or maybe even start a new routine, the less likely I am to get stuck into these old ways of thinking. And I think that may be part of the environmental thing, is like just mixing things up. Like I said, when I was out visiting my brother when I was out of town, just being in that environment, that changed a lot of things for me, some good and some bad. But it wasn't like it literally changed the way I was thinking about things. It changed the way I was acting and stuff like that, or the behaviors that I was doing, because some of it I didn't have control of the environment. But I guess like I might be going off topic here a little bit. I'm just like I said, I'm just trying to get a feel for some bad
Well,
habits
some
that
other
aren't
habits are like, keeping a cluttered house, like,
there. Yeah, that's another good one.
hoarding and shopping and
That's a good one. Yeah.
what else? Attention seeking, approval seeking. Yeah, I don't think those are some good psychological ones, like approval seeking habit. I mean, I can probably bet that a lot of listeners have that habit. I'm dealing with that all the time, trying to like, what am I doing right now? Am I acting because I'm trying to seek approval, or am I acting because I'm going after what I want?
Right. Right. And I might have thrown a little bit of a monkey wrench in here with like, as far as the environmental thing, I might have gone too far off that topic. I
Well,
don't
what are some
know.
other ways that we can break these habits? I mean, I think, well, like meditation is the mindfulness basically is like the key to recognizing when you are acting, and the sooner you can catch yourself acting in these ways, then the sooner you can step in front of it and catch it off. Like nip it in the bud, basically.
I
And
agree.
yeah, and then you get to experience mindfully, consciously, like you're aware, like, oh my god, here's my trigger, and wow, look how uncomfortable I feel as I try not to engage in that routine, that habit.
Hmm.
You know.
Well, another good thing about the environmental shift is I believe the environmental shift also does play into that mindfulness aspect, because when you're not in your routine and your habit and your familiar surroundings, you are more, if you're not your face isn't buried in your smartphone, you are more aware of your surroundings and how you're acting. And you could even say it's being a little self-conscious to some degree, but it's more about being self-observational. But it's definitely something where I found that by doing new things or changing up things, from not being in the places where I used to do those old bad habits, I was more aware of when like you said, the urge did come up. So and that paired with meditation, I really do think that an environmental change, even if it just means once a week, you decide to do something different. You don't have to like, move out of state because you're trying to quit smoking. It's the idea is more of like, what can I do, to like when I realized some of my triggers were triggered by things that had nothing to do with the cigarettes. That's when I was like, oh, well, this isn't a cigarette. So that carried over into other things that were more behavioral based. For me, it was a lot of thought processes, but I was like, oh, this is just a habitual thought process. I'm just doing this because, you know what I mean? And I was able to more, I was more mindful of my thought processes because I was in a different environment. So,
Yeah. And I recognize that whenever I'm on vacation or
hmm
I tend to not look at my phone as much. Like I just don't have I don't know what it is. It's almost like like I want I desire more to be in the present moment when I'm out on vacation experiencing something new, because that's like I don't want to miss out on the novelty of being someplace new or experiencing something different. So it's like I don't want to lose myself in my phone. Whereas if I'm at home, that there's all sorts of instances where I just default into looking at my phone, and it's like it's pretty crazy. But like another way of changing the environment, George, is like, if you're trying to quit smoking, then try just don't have cigarettes in your house, in your vicinity. Don't have the food in the vicinity. Put your phone in a different room, like, or turn it off, or turn off all your notifications if you're trying to focus. It's like just take the stuff out of the room, rearrange stuff, make it a little uncomfortable, or make it so it's not as easy.
right,
Or like if you're trying to build a habit, put your running shoes by your bed.
right.
They say to do those things, or make it like so you don't have to think.
Well, that's a big, big part of the making some of these things work. Is it's making them default. I mean, nobody has to think. I mean, one of the habits everybody has. I mean, I hope everybody has it, but everybody brushes their teeth when they wake up before they go to bed. Hopefully, I mean, at least when you wake up, I would assume. But nobody thinks about that anymore. And what one of these another tip that I stumbled across, when I was getting into this stuff was the idea of like anchoring a habit to another habit that's already established. So like, okay, you get up and you brush your teeth, like you said, put if you want to do something, put a pen and a notebook right next to your toothbrush and say, when I'm done brushing my teeth, I'm going to write a paragraph of my novel or whatever. So it just becomes eventually, because I've found that by doing, and it sounds very simple, or I'm trying to think of a negative word, but it doesn't sound very effective, but it's probably the most effective thing that I've found was to chain a new habit to an existing one, so that's like,
Oh yes, that absolutely does work.
yeah, I do this right after I do that. And then, the trick is also one of the things they talk about is you have to have, they have to be, you have to make small changes, and they have to be, you have to be able to get a reward from it. You have to get a sense of accomplishment from it. So it's like, don't say, like, let's say you wanted to start eating better. You don't like go to the, the food, the produce department and just buy all, you don't start from scratch and just buy all new food and change all your behaviors all at once. That's never going to work. It's going to be too overwhelming. What you need to do is just say, every day for one of my meals, I'm going to add one serving of it with one vegetable. And I'm going to do that. That's what I'm going to do. So that way you're establishing a small change. It's, the habit of eating is, you don't even have to worry about, that's not even a habit, but, every day at dinner, say or lunch, whatever, you just have some broccoli, or you have a different one every day of the week, whatever you want to do, but you do it slowly, and you chain these things in slowly. So you don't say, I'm going to write a chapter of a book tomorrow. You say, I'm going to write one sentence, or I'm going to write one paragraph. And it's like, it's more about, it's not about how much you got done. It's more about that you do it every single day on a very consistent basis, to the point where eventually you're, like I said, with the brushing the teeth, you're not even thinking about it. This is just what you do. This is just how the day get, like, oh, I just do this after that. You don't even, what I mean? You're not even analyzing it anymore. You're not even, that's one of the big things they talk about, is it has to get ingrained into your experience, to the point where you're no longer making decisions about these things. You're just doing them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you said so many good things. I think it's a good time to transition into building new habits. I mean, on one last point on getting rid of bad habits is, like, if you're trying to eliminate a habit, you need to replace it with something. Like, you have your trigger, your routine, and your reward. So like when you have your trigger and you're trying to change your routine, you can't just, it's harder to just ignore it and deal with the frustration. It's better to have a new habit in place of it. And
Right.
It could be a slight variation. So instead of when I feel frustrated at work or bored and I normally go up and get a cup of coffee, well, maybe I'll replace that cup of coffee with a cup of tea, or like just something simple like that.
Right.
Or replace it with um, a walk around the block, or
Hmm.
something that's like just slightly different, and that's important. But like what George said about the tiny habits, the small habits that you do, like the writing the one sentence, like that's actually really really key. And when I first started my getting up early morning routine habit, there was I I tried to get up early and I failed the first day, and then I got up early the next day and I was like all pumped, and I got up 2 hours, an hour early the next day, and then I started slowly fading back into my old habits, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm not a morning person. I guess I'm not going to do this. But it wasn't until I read, Zen Habits and The Power of Habit when they talked about the small things and trying to get yourself out of the thought process where you're not actually using willpower to decide to do the habit, but you just do it based on instinct and habit and memory. And when you're learning a new instrument, you're fumbling all around until you get your muscle memory. So it's like until you get your muscle memory and the way that your body moves in the morning or whatever it is, so you can do it on autopilot. So how do you get something on autopilot? And you do that by starting off really, really small and doing it as consistently as possible, and then giving yourself the reward. Sometimes the reward is in the doing of it, but what you said, George, about the chaining, the linking, what you're doing is setting up your trigger. So it's like when the TV comes on, I normally go get a bowl of cereal or whatever. So like when the TV comes on, that's when I'm going to do X. Or, when I wake up in the morning and I brush my teeth, I'm going to look in the mirror and say 3 affirmations or something like that. So
Right.
I'll talk about my morning routine, because it was like I started off with, if I can just get up early, then I'll fill it with all sorts of other good habits. I just need to build up the waking up early habit first, and that's called a keystone habit. It's a habit that builds other habits. So it's like it's definitely a known fact that like if you exercise more, you'll be more inclined to do you'll be more inclined to do a lot other habits. So it's like if you can wake up early, it just builds other positive habits like so much easier. So I I tricked myself into getting up early by trying to make it feel like Christmas. Because I mean, if there's one time a year where you have no trouble sleeping, you get up. Well, not no trouble sleeping, trouble actually staying out of bed. I mean, you go into bed and you want to get up as fast as possible. There's presents under the tree, so it's like you're super excited. It doesn't matter how little sleep you get. So how could you make that like your experience to help you build this habit of waking up early? And I mean, I did it. I took advantage of the fact that a show like Breaking Bad was terribly addicting, and I loved the show. So I would actually just watch it in the morning instead of at nighttime.
That's a good move.
Yeah, so it's like instead of watching it before bed or whatever, or trying to delay going to bed because for whatever reason I don't want to end my day, I'd rather like end the day and then start it off with like the thing that it's going to be really fun. And then after that, if I'm still awake and still up, I've had my coffee, I've had an episode of Breaking Bad. Now I got a half an hour before I got to get ready for work. So now is perfect time to do other stuff. So I threw in journaling, meditation, yoga, exercise. I tried a ton of different things, and then a lot of them stuck. And I used, assisting. I used some tools to assist me, like Lyft. I know you're a user of Lyft, George, but it's a habit building app. It's something on your phone to kind of help you check in on a daily basis. So you're kind of keeping track of like, oh, I've got a streak of 10 meditations going. I don't want to screw that one up, but yeah. So like the more if I established that waking up early habit, and it did become sort of ingrained where waking up early was my default mode. And if I wasn't waking up early, I felt really out of place and like, oh, I was cheating, I was losing,
And that brings up a good point, because what I found is that you know that you've done your habit long enough where it feel like your goal is to make it feel weird not to do it. You know what I mean? So like for me, when and I see this with people online and people I've talked to, about meditation and stuff like, and different, things like that, where they're like, oh, I just can't get into it. And I'm like, oh, I'm on that point. I got to the point where now I feel, not only do I look forward to it, but I feel I have a little bit of an anxiety of not doing it, and what that tells you is that you can, all of these habits that you've picked up are programmable. They're reprogrammable as well. So like you said before, I'm not a morning person, quote unquote. Well, I'm not, but I mean, you can reprogram yourself to do that stuff. So it's like when you say I'm not, it's like, no, that's just the habits that you've had up to this point, and you really can change things. And I think, speaking of the keystone, my keystone habit was making the bed. I picked that up from some dude on Lyft, but I was like, who cares about making your bed? But I'll tell you what, I I tell everybody, I'm like, just start making your bed in the morning. It doesn't even have to be a good job. I don't even do a good job. I just make sure it's relatively, tidy, but it will change things for you if you just make sure you do that. Oh, it's weird, man. Like I call them the bookend habits is I make the bed in the morning and I make sure that my dishes are all done before I go to bed at night. And so that's the two things that I do before, outside of like brushing your teeth and all that kind of stuff. I just, for the house, I guess it's just like, they sound so dumb and so mundane. I shouldn't say dumb. Just they sound so, so lackluster. But
Yeah.
yes, but it really made a big difference for me. So I'm like, because I work. I'm not sure what your situation is, but I'm working at home, so I walk by my bedroom on a regular basis. I got a tiny house, and seeing the bed made, I'm like, yes, I accomplished something today. Even as dumb as that sounds, and how as simplistic as it might seem, that's really what they're getting at with all this stuff. Is that you need to have those small victories, and you need to have a little bit of reward. And I like your idea of the reward. And you touched on exactly what they say. The reward has to come after the new behavior, and replacing a reward or replacing an old reward with a new reward is a great way to do things too. Um, but
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I want to pick up a habit like that. I mean, right now I get up, my wife's still in the bed, so I'd be like, "Hey, pardon me, I'm making the bed." But I think what it's good to like maybe get up and so say for example in my house, there's like a throw blanket, usually like kind of tossed aside, and the pillows are all messed up on the couch. But it's like I can wake up, go in there, set the pillows nicely, and fold the blanket. And it's like every time I would walk through the living room, I would see it looks nice in there. And it was like,
right,
and just that's 2 minutes, not even of what it takes to do that. It will set your mind at ease because you feel productive, accomplished, like right off the bat.
right.
And you can do that automatic too. You don't even have to think about it. It's not like writing a paragraph in your book.
Yep. That's what I like about that's the making the bed. It's just, there's no thought involved. You don't have to do it well. There's nobody judging you. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no sense of ego attached to how well. I mean, I guess some people might have a hang up about that stuff, but
Yeah.
but the big thing that they say is with all of this stuff is, and the reason that the habits have to be small, at least to start with, and then you can expand from there once they're established. But you need to have that accomplishment. You have to accomplish something, and then once you accomplish something, you get a sense of self-esteem. And as ridiculous as it sounds, you still get a self-esteem improvement from making your bed. It's because you chose to do it. You followed it through. You followed that through, and then you can look back and go, I did that. I accomplished that, and that was one of the things I set out to do. So those small, seemingly insignificant things all really add up, and that kind of really touches on something that you don't think about too. Is like how many of these unconscious behaviors I have are adding up to affect my life. Like the thoughts that I have or the behaviors that I do, or these, there's a lot of small things that may be detracting from that self-esteem, which is going to erode your willpower. It's going to make you less likely, like, as you said before, once you start exercising, that will spill over into wanting to do other healthy and positive things, add more habits. And I really believe that it has to do with the fact that you're like, I can do this stuff, because that's a big thing when you realize that you can, when you change one. Like for me, quitting smoking was a big one. When I realized I had that control, I was like, well, I'm going to do some other things now. You know what I mean? And it really just took its own life. And I was like, you realize that you had, I think that's one of the things you don't realize you have is control. You think you don't, or you behave as if you don't. And that spills over into the rest of your life. So that's why one bad habit can spill into another one. But once you show a little bit of, backbone, you feel good about yourself, that self-esteem goes up. And then that feeling, when you're not getting that dopamine hit from all this other nonsense or from unhealthy sources, you do get a dopamine hit from those little small victories, and you want more of that. Like it's like you said, about doing the folding up the blanket on the couch. I was never like I'm not a neat and tidy person. I mean, I'm better than I used to be, but I'm not
Hmm.
I'm not the cleanest or the most organized person, I should say. But I'm getting more like that because I'm like, I want to clean that up. I don't want that to be, and it's more about setting little challenges for myself. And it's, I'm getting a kick out of, or I'm getting a dopamine hit out of accomplishing these small things, especially when they're at odds with how I formerly perceive myself.
Yeah, yeah, and we get a dopamine hit from checking something off a list. That's why there's so many to-do list apps out there.
Right. Well, and when you mentioned earlier about being on speaking of the dopamine, that was something that I thought when you mentioned about going on vacation and not wanting to be on the phone. I mean, being on vacation, you have novelty. When you're at home, you don't have novelty. Your routines tend to not bring you any. The novelty is where the dopamine hit comes from
Yep.
novelty, something new, the newness of something. And so it's makes a lot of sense that you would, when you're out of your habit, your routine, and your pattern, and the day to day, repetitiveness, that you won't need those external dopamine hits. But when you're in your day to day life, that's where you're looking for that stuff, and that's why I think changing up these little habits, adding a little new thing to challenge yourself every day. And like I said before, just say I'm going to eat some vegetables with every dinner. It doesn't, just even if you just eat one piece of one vegetable, it's those little things that I think you gotta, that can be a healthy monkey wrench, a positive monkey wrench in the works where you
Yeah,
such.
you talked about like the novelty, right? And like, okay, I've been doing this wake up early habit for a while, and I've been meditating for over a year and a half, and all these other things, all these great habits. But then they become part of the novel. They become part of the routine. They become
Mm-hmm.
then they get old. So it's like, oh, great! I've been exercising and meditating and doing affirmations and doing like morning routine. It starts to turn into just the same old day, and then like suddenly now your phone looks a lot more attractive. What
Right.
someone's posting on Facebook looks a lot more interesting than what you're going to get out of meditation for the 89th time in a row. Like, it's you get burnt out. So it's like, how do you add novelty to the good habits that you've already established? If you when someone gets to that point,
That's a good question. I don't have no idea. I mean, I still deal with that myself, but I think, we're both fans of The War of Art, Stephen
yeah,
Pressfield's book. And one of the things that I always come back, I mean, I reread that book at least every 60 days, if not more often, especially when I, feel like I need it. But I have certain passages just like blazed in my brain. And one of them is I don't know if you remember it, it's the Henry Fonda story where he talks about how Henry Fonda, who at the time was, I mean, I don't know, is he still alive now? I don't even know, but he's up in his 80s or his 90s or something like that, still acting, and still said he was on the inside the actor studio and told the host that he's like, I still get so nervous before I go up on stage that I throw up. And the point of Pressfield bringing that up is that he said, what Fonda realized was that never goes away, and what your job is to do is to figure out a way to work past it. And so, in the case of the positive routines, losing their novelty, that's been my solution. Is what I do is I go, I don't. It doesn't matter if you don't like doing it. You know it's good for you, and it doesn't. I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of the healthy things that I like, or that I've started up. They've become routines for me now, where it does feel weird when I don't do them, only out of the fact that it would feel weird not to brush your teeth in the morning. So it's like I've gotten to that point with most of them where I'm like, nope, I just do it. I don't listen to that little part of my brain that tries to talk me out of it anymore. But I think that Henry Fonda story really plays into what you need to do with some of this stuff. Is that you're not going to get, you're not going to get a reward. You're not going to get a pat in the back. I mean, because that's one thing with all this stuff is that a lot of people, and like you said before, you're seeking approval or looking for external validation with stuff. I think you're touching on something along those lines. But I think that plays a big factor in a lot of this stuff with people, and I know it did for me. Where you want someone to go, "Hey, good job," or and apps like Lyft and some other social networks that are centered around this stuff. I think they play into this where you know, you get some feedback from other people to kind of keep you going, to coach you or to cheerlead for you or whatever you want to call it. But you know, I think if you can get these things into being new routines and patterns where it feels weird not to do them, then you can get past all that crap of having to get some kind of feedback or reward from doing it, or whether it's psychological or whatever.
Yeah, that's
Because
true. Well, that's true. And I think, you know, when you get to the point where you're like, okay, it's like meditating, I'm getting burnt out on it, or like my waking up early habit no longer feels novel, and it just feels like the same old thing. I no longer feel like I'm getting up early anymore. It's the time I always get up. So
right,
there is no rush of getting up before you used to. So I think here's some two things that I thought that can actually help with that. Instead of just pushing through, you know, like you said, the Henry Fonda story, which I think is good, it's valid. It's overcoming that resistance that you have, because you're not always going to be able to have that novelty or be able to change, but is to reduce your addiction to novelty through turning off all this artificial stimulus that's feeding you novelty all the time. And then as you kind of reprogram your brain to appreciate novelty in smaller ways like nature and other subtler ways that will give you little hits of dopamine when you see, rather than being fed like constant novelty at a fast pace all day through your phone, through TV, through media, and wherever else, right? So if you can reduce that in your environment, you'll be more attuned, and then add that novelty into your routines that you're currently burnt out on. Like, say, meditation, you're burnt out onto it. What can you do differently that's going to actually spice it up for you? Like, for me, I would maybe download a new meditation app or something like that, or read a new book about meditation, just to kind of reignite the spark, because it kind of dies out. You know, you get in a groove, and then that turns into a ditch, right? And then you're just like, ugh, it doesn't feel fun anymore. You know, you can't, and you don't have the reward that you used to. Like when you start a habit, like you're getting all kind of reward, and then eventually those rewards, you get used to it, and then those no longer feel as good. You can, you know what I mean? And sometimes stop the habit for a little bit until you build up this craving for it again, and then you can, when you dive back into it, then you have a newfound appreciation. It might bring back that novelty again. So those are my two tips on that.
and I totally agree with those. And I think, you know, when I mentioned at the outset with being on that, you know, being out of town for almost 2 weeks when I went to visit my brother,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that wasn't something I did on purpose, but I was actually really into the groove of a lot of my habits and stuff. And I was actually kind of bummed out that I knew I was going to disrupt those a little bit. And I you know, had to deal with that, you know, and I got out there, and it took me a while. I'm not going to go off on the tangent there, but had some insights about, you know, why you see like meditation retreats, and they always say, 10 days is where you want it. And I really realized that it takes you a while to get out of your routines and then to really be where you're at. And by the time I was on my, you know, the sixth or seventh day out there, I realized like I was out of my routine. I wasn't really doing, you know, I wasn't doing the habits every day. But when I got back home, I was really energized to do them again, because I hadn't been able to do them, even though I wasn't burned out. I was just kind of prevented from, through circumstance, from doing them. And so I was like, you know, I can attest to what you're saying, is that even if it's not, you know, something, even if you're not burned out, by taking a break, you can come back and go. Because that's, you know, I was at a point where I was kind of a little disillusioned with meditation for a while when I first started out, and I had a buddy of mine online. I was like, any tips? And he was like, well, just don't meditate for 2 weeks. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, yeah, see, you're getting something out of it. You just don't realize it, you know? So I think that's something too, that you know, by taking a break, it might, you know, it might put it that more in contrast when you think about, I'm not getting anything out of this, or I'm not enjoying this anymore. If you don't do it for 2 days, and you might realize like, oh yeah, I'm totally getting something out of this, and I miss it, you know? So
Yeah. Good point. I mean, yeah, you're totally spot on about that. You know, it's like sometimes I get these like moments where I'm just like, what's the point of these habits? Like, is this how I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life? Is just kind of looking at this to-do list of habits that I've started for myself? Like, does it ever end? You know, like eventually it gets to the point where it's like that becomes like your just ritual, your life. You know what I mean? Because I mean, we have 24 hours in the day. We do stuff all day, And who's in control of what we do? Like, is it us? Did we decide? Are we accomplishing what we want? Are we creating what we want? You know what I mean? That's like, where's that desire to create coming from? Is it coming from our sort of deep, true self of like what we want to make in this world? Or is it kind of, focused around not feeling uncomfortable or, being
Right.
safe and just like not going against any grain, not trying to stand out, or, and it's like this mediocre existence that most I feel like Americans live in, where they're just kind of mildly uncomfortable, but not enough to do anything about it and enough to buy stuff like to fix it. And then that's how they really kind of live. And I think if you don't consciously come up with habits are one thing, but really kind of small little goals and stuff for you to do. So you change your programming of your daily routine into things that you created, then you get sort of default into what you kind of turn into, like the mass sheep or whatever.
The robot hive, man.
You turn into that without even realizing it.
Well, speaking of like, what you're just talking about and like, how do you, avoid the getting burned out? For me, I'll tell you what it is. It's that I can, without a doubt, say that my life has been improved since I did it. And I guess maybe it hasn't been long enough, since that period of time, but I was in a dark spot, for a while. And I know how bad that was. And like you mentioned at the outset, I'm afraid that if I stop doing these things, I'm going to slip back there. And a part of that, it does come into play here. But at the same time, I'm also like, I have like enthusiasm to do things. Like I'm experimenting with some, food and some cooking things lately. And like things like I have like this urge to do things that in the past, I didn't even have the urge to do things I enjoyed in the past. Now I have the urge to find out what I might enjoy, to try new things, which I was totally out of the question before. So, for me, that's one of the things that, even though this stuff can be repetitive and it can at least on paper seem like, oh, this is just like you said it perfectly. Just this is your new routine, so it's no longer, it's not new. It's not a new thing you're doing. But for me, I look at the quality of my life and I have the quality of my experience of my own life, and contrast that with what it was that triggered me to start down this path. And I can see such a huge and such a dramatic change that it's just, that's what fuels me on those days where I'm like, because everybody goes through it. I'm kind of a, again, this goes into the perfectionism thing a little bit, but I'm kind of a bulldog when it comes to this stuff. And I definitely pride myself on I have an app on the phone that keeps, like you were saying, keeps track of my streaks. And it's like a calendar that you can check off each day. And I really get bummed out when I miss a day, but you miss them. But at the same time, I'm like, I never let it go more than a day or two after that, because I'm like, I just know like, yeah, you're going through a rough spot now. And maybe a little bit it is you're a little burned out or it's repetitive, but in the long run, your life is better than it was. And that's really the goal of all of this stuff. And what I used to think the same thing about like, is this what I'm going to do is just do these habits all day. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but I'm happier. And I wasn't happy doing all the old stuff I was doing. And who cares? Like, that's okay. I'm okay with just doing this stuff. Maybe, I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but I'm like, I think maybe I'm just not as maybe this is the kind of person I am. And maybe it's just part of establishing new habits is part of accepting who you are, and that may not be who you thought you were,
Yeah. And there's a tendency for us to want to like overachieve, and constantly do like, you meditate a lot. You're familiar with like Buddhist teachings and all sorts of different types of meditations where it's about being rather than doing. And so I'll always fall into the trap of like constantly looking for this next thing to do, and then also worrying about my productivity and efficiency while doing it. Like I just feel like I don't want to waste time, and it's like I want to check something off a list. And there's like those mild little addictions to productivity, and it's like I'm mindful of it. I'm like, wow, who is it that's actually being frustrated with like a day where I just want to chill and relax and just be, like say I want to go out in nature and spend 3 hours without doing anything. And then it's like, there's a frustration of somebody who wants to get up and move and do something, it's like, and even if that doing is only like watching a movie off Netflix and checking it off my list.
Right.
I feel like that's productive in some way rather than if I'm just being and meditating. It's like I'm not getting anything done. Like I hate that.
I deal with the same thing, man. It's that could be that may be unhealthy. I don't know.
I agree. I mean, it kind of is. And I think there's two parts to it. Like one is a cultural program of workaholism, of productivity, like what are you putting out? What's the ROI? And coming from an entrepreneur and business owner's perspective, it's like if you're not doing something that's going to generate money, it's a waste of time, and
Hmm.
like we have that kind of drilled into our head as a culture. And like, okay, you're an artist. So you want to go create some art. Oh, but it's not going to generate any money for you. So it's like, well, you kind of feel guilty doing it. And I think that thought process is kind of just such bullshit in a way. Like we've trained ourselves to think that it's only valuable to our life if it generates revenue, in some roundabout way. But of course, I know that's not all the way true. And the other part about it is, well, so the first part was a cultural program of being productive constantly, and
I
then
don't even I don't even think it's being productive. I think it's a program to be busy. That's what it seems like.
yeah,
But
yeah, 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 yeah. I think you're
go
right
ahead.
about that too. Yeah, be busy. That's another good one. But the other thing is this sort of like mild anxiety that I would have when I feel like I'm not doing something important that I want to be doing, and I don't know what it is. It's like, oh, nothing on my habits like is actually going to scratch this itch that I have. I don't know what this itch is. Maybe it's
Right.
something in my phone. Oh no, nothing is going to, I'll check Reddit, I'll check Facebook, I'll check like all these things. Nothing's scratching this itch. And I don't know what that itch is, but I think my intuition is telling me that I don't know what that is, but it's like this longing for this greater purpose of something that I'm here on this planet. So this is where it gets a little bit like esoteric, where it's like there's something that I should be doing that maybe it's not even in my awareness yet. You know, it's like a purpose that I'm supposed to be filling, and I'm frustrated because I'm not doing it, but I don't know what it is yet.
But at the same time, it may be, it could be a thing where what you need to do is be comfortable with not doing anything. You know what I mean? That may be what that anxiety is. That anxiety is the anxiety of not, of not, like you said, not being productive. Because I go through the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know exactly what you're talking about, but it could be something bigger, but maybe it could be something very small. It could be a fact that we're not supposed to always be productive and always, did I send you the link with the guy with the secret behind the 40-hour work week? Did I send that to you? I posted it on
No,
Twitter the other day.
no, I haven't seen it.
No, I'll send it to you. We can put it in the show notes. It's really interesting. It touches on a lot of these topics that you just brought up stuff I've been thinking about for a couple months now. But the author really said it well, put it well. But I'll send that off to you.
No, I think you had a great counterpoint to that because if you're feeling an anxiety, it's usually because here's a source for that anxiety that you would feel is something in your environment has caused a subconscious part of you to feel triggered like of some sort of pain. And maybe in the past when you were in a situation that's kind of similar, you experienced some sort of pain, some sort of shame or guilt trip from someone else or and I think I kind of I like to think of it when I was a kid, and if I was playing or not doing chores, I got in trouble. And I felt like what mattered wasn't really what I wanted. It was kind of like I had to be doing the important work, the work that needed to be done. And if I was doing something extracurricular, I wasn't really rewarded for it. I was kind of guilt tripped for it. And especially if I was just lazy, if I didn't feel like doing anything, if I was playing video games, it was fun for me, whatever. But it was like there was a badness to it when I was a kid. And so like I internalized that subconsciously. So even if there's no one telling me to feel bad about it, it's like there's like a discomfort or an unease kind of circulating through my body in the background, like on days when I'm not feeling very productive.
No, how would you get that as a kid to be this productivity anxiety as a kid? Like,
Well, say it's like I think it goes back to my dad, like I'd be at home from school, like sitting on the couch. Maybe I'm drawing, or maybe I'm playing video games, or just up to no good. You know what I mean? And then dad comes home. Oh, I didn't take out the trash, or I didn't mow the lawn, or I didn't do this or do that. And it's like, like I knew I was going to get yelled at when dad got home, because I would feel bad, like I wasn't doing like what my parents, or the adults, wanted me to do, and I just felt like I wasn't good enough if I was
So there's some approval or some external validation going on there for sure.
oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's an authority thing too, and I think it's attracted situations in my life where I will feel the need to please the authority figure, and then I feel good about being like I'm productive if I've done all of the work that I was assigned.
Right.
And then if I, even if it was completely meaningless work that didn't
Right.
do anything for me personally, I did it and it's off my list. I made the boss satisfied. It's like, all right, I'm a good worker. Therefore, I'm valuable. And that would feel an awesome sense of like satisfaction and relief. I'd go home feeling good about my day, even though I had not chosen any of those tasks. I didn't say, this is exactly what I want to do or create in my life. It was just checking off a list of some other task that someone else assigned to me. So, and same that also happens too when I've got an inbox full of emails and I've gone to inbox zero. I've responded to all of the questions that people have of me. So I think it goes to just the outside, you know, influences and the validation and the approval. Like there's some satisfaction, and then an unease when you feel like you may be falling behind on some obligations or something.
Well, when you brought this up, it triggered this thought in me that I never really thought about before. But because I go through the same thing. I even just went through this. I think it was last night or the day before. But just like not motivated. I know I should be. There's things I want to get done. I have projects that have very identifiable steps. I know exactly what to do. I just have to sit down and do them. And I've been procrastinating on doing them. I can watch myself procrastinate. I even wrote down to myself, I'm like, you're procrastinating on that. I knew exactly what I was up to.
Yep.
Like I saw right through my own ruse, but it just struck me now that I think sometimes the anxiety that I feel in those situations might stem from when I was growing up, my family didn't have a lot of money, so that was always something that was always a big that flavored every experience that we had. There's always a struggle with that, and I think that definitely when you said always doing something that's productive or something that could make money. I never really crossed my mind that when I have these anxieties that it could be related to that, where it's like you whatever you do, everything you do has to be to make money, because you don't want to end up like that. The way that you grew up, you want to make sure that you're avoiding that situation. So you need to be always making money, doing anything for frivolous or personal or just for, or having a non-productive moment, or, because like for me, I run into the problem where if I'm not, I have to be like, and part of it is just because I enjoy them, but a lot of times I'm like, I got to be listening to an audiobook or a podcast that has information, or I'm learning something, or it's like,
Oh yes, me too.
I almost can't do, stuff that's frivolous. I don't even listen to that much music anymore. So I'm like, nope, this is time I could be spending learning stuff. And sometimes I'm like, it's almost like I'm addicted, or I have a compulsion with that. It's like,
Oh yeah, you're right. I agree. I'm in the same boat, and those are thoughts that I've thought this week. Even I mean, like, it's like you can get down on yourself for just trying to enjoy, like, like the Browns game on Sunday. Like
right.
NFL football game. You're like, I'm like, I'll multitask and I'll like listen to an audiobook while I'm watching it, or I'll actually I finished a book while I was watching the game last week. And that's like, I feel good about it because it's like, well, okay, I kind of want to watch this game, because I've always done it, and I don't want to miss it, and I want to watch it. But then it's like, I've got like 5 books I'm trying to finish, and it's like, it's a 3-hour thing. I'm sitting on my butt watching this game, 4-hour thing. You know what I mean? perfect time to do it. I can't do dishes without listening to a podcast or an audiobook. It's hard to
Right.
drive without listening to an audiobook or a podcast. Like, yeah, it's this information and I love it. I'm so insatiable. Like, as soon as I finish one, where's the next one? It's like constantly queued up. I got a watch later list in YouTube that's like overflowing. And yeah. And I love the multitasking ability, like to do a physical work that's kind of mundane and then having the audiobook or YouTube video or whatever that's kind of talking to me as I do it. That's a beautiful combination. It's like left brain, right brain working together.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't get too down on myself for doing it because I do know that I've always been a big reader and I went through a big chunk of time, up until a few years ago where I wasn't reading at all, and I realized like that's a big part of my life that I was ignoring that I need that, now that I have it back in, I'm like, oh, I forgot how much I enjoy reading and thinking and all this stuff. And I'm like, so part of me is like, I don't think it's on the productivity level, but I think it can get out of hand to some degree where I did the same thing as you did. I'm like, all right, well, I don't have any books in my queue. I don't really know what I want to read or listen to. And I had an anxiety about not having something productive on the plate,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, why can't I just enjoy something? Like right now I'm making I'm learning how to ferment my own sauerkraut. And so of course I'm reading tons of stuff about that, so it's like, even though it's a hobby thing, I'm still learning, you know what I mean? And I'm still like, oh, well, that counts, so, and I think it does count to some degree. At least it's a little bit less, it's a little bit more on the, on the lighter side or whatever, because it's not as serious as some of this stuff can be. But I think it can be, that can be a tricky thing where you're, you put it well with the anxiety about being productive. Like I've definitely experienced that a lot.
It's weird because that word productive kind of has changed a little bit for me, like what actually productive means, because, productive 5 years ago meant something completely different than productive now. Like, I think there's a productive consumption and learning, and then productive production, like in making. And those are two different sort of feelings of accomplishment, like I love to learn and take information and not just to take in the information, but it's like the experience of being surrounded by that voice or that environment. It's like, I'll read so many books and it's not like I'm taking notes and trying to save all this information. I think I just like being around someone else talking about these things that I'm interested in. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's all it really is. It's, instead of watching mainstream TV, I'm listening to podcasts about people talking about topics that are really relevant to me, and it's like,
yep,
they're inspiring me. I'm getting like a high, those dopamine rushes coming from this new place,
right,
rather than the old place, which was sitcoms on TV or, whatever the mainstream media or whatever is trying to push at you, So it's like,
well, I kind of look at it like
you've changed it a little bit.
Right, and the way I look at it is like the mainstream, the advertiser fueled garbage, basically is to me that's junk food conversations, and an audiobook or a good podcast is more like it's like a whole food information,
Yeah,
so
that's
it's
a
like
good way of putting it.
They digest at a different speed. There's nutrients in one of them is just for energy and stimulation. You know what I mean? So there's ways to look at that stuff. Like that's one thing too, is like, you can't get too caught up in like saying, oh, I'm going to avoid all of this stuff. It's like, you can't, your brain is wired to want dopamine hits, and you're not going to get away from that. But what you said earlier is the key. The key is to get it from different sources. So get it at more natural levels, which is what I was trying to get back with the whole freebasing analogy. But
yeah, that's a good point, because that comes right into this discussion I was having a couple weeks ago on a podcast about porn and pornography. I mean, I've grown up, I've used porn, you know what I mean? It became a habit, and it's just kind of something that everyone does, right? But if you think about it, it's the exploitation of one of our most primal drives, like the sexual urge is like one of mankind's biggest sources of energy. Like when someone is like when an animal or a person is sexually aroused, they'll work hard, to get their goal. Like, and the thing is, porn, it's like the crack cocaine, the fast food, the McDonald's of that type of instant gratification stimulation. You can go on the internet and find novelty in an infinite amount. I mean, it's basically got everything overloaded. And when you
Yep.
talk about that gets a bad rap, porn does, because it's kind of based on sexuality, which has a lot of hang-ups, like it's just sexuality in general is really a tough thing to talk about this day and age. But people get the same sort of rush from social media and the attention seeking and the approval and the notifications, the little hits and hits and hits of notifications. That's just as much of a rush, and you talk about like action movies for men, it's like there's the adrenaline, and they're all Hollywood films. It's like they're not that this is anything wrong. I mean, we as creatives are the ones in Hollywood producing these types of footage, because it's like we know what's going to get us going and what's going to get people in seats, what's going to keep holding people's attention, And so we create that for ourselves. We create it for each other because we're trying to get people's attention. So it's like violence and action is just, especially in an action movie, it's like triggering the lizard brain, the amygdala, those different responses that are really tied to our primal urges.
Right. Well, these are urges that aren't influenced by the prefrontal cortex. So I mean, they really just, that's just, talk about hardwired. That's like the logical part of your brain, the rational part of your brain can't do anything about that. It short circuits it away from there. So like,
yeah, exactly.
When you get, and really, that's the crazy thing too. When you start researching dopamine, is you realize that, the drugs that people are addicted to, really what they're addicted to is the dopamine that's released from doing the drugs. Like the drugs have have an effect too, but the dopamine is really what's behind this. So like you said, pornography and social media and all these things, they really at the core, they all have dopamine as this thing that people are looking for. And it's just different ways to stimulate that within your body. So you can, that's one of the internet is, with the attention and the proliferation, or the way it can suck up your attention is basically what I'm saying. The way it can, mesmerize you basically, because of it's just basically, and the internet never ends. You know what I mean? You can't ever, think about the RSS feed. I don't know if you subscribe. I guarantee that you're an RSS feed guy, even though most people aren't.
Yeah, I've got Feedly.
Right. Of course you do. So, but think about how many times you subscribe to something that, some new topic you're into. Oh, I'm going to subscribe to this thing because I'm really into this, thing right now. And then, 6 months later, you go back, because you always go out into your RSS reader with the best of intentions, like, I'm just going to subscribe to what I actually read. I'm not going to put all this extra stuff on here. And then 6 months later, you have like 77 blogs you're subscribed to, and like multiple hundreds of articles that you're just never going to get through. And it's like, think about how much stuff's on the internet. Like your Feedly account is what you've chosen, and you're still overwhelmed with it. So there's just so much stuff out there that it's just, if you allow yourself to get sucked into that stuff, it's very difficult to extract yourself from it, because it does, like you said, it hits those parts of the brain and the neurobiology, and it works, and people know this, and you just have to be very, I agree with what you said earlier. You just need to be more in control of the sources that you get it from, and it's just because you enjoy something does not mean that you should do a lot of it. You know what I mean? That's really how things have been structured. The internet's a perfect example of it. It's like, if you want something, you get into pornography. That's been around since the dawn of man. I guarantee it, but not literally, like I said before, or not literally, but the free-based levels of stuff is what makes, like the coca leaf in cocaine is really not all that harmful. And I don't think it's even addictive. The problem is when you do cocaine, you're doing like 10,000 coca leaves at once. That's what the problem is, that your body, like nature puts in safeguards. It makes things slow, food digests slow, like healthy food digests slow at least. But, it's the same with anything else in our environment. We're not designed to be over inundated with things that we like. It's really the thing that comes down to, where health issues come for people and bad eating habits and stuff like that. It's because you're supposed to like sugar and crave sugar. The problem is that your environment was never supposed to provide so much of it. That's really what happens, is that, people can say, oh, I can't help myself. It's like, it has nothing to do with you. It's not you. It's not your fault. It's the environment we live in, the society we live in, the civilization it's structured to give you too much of what you want at levels that are just way beyond anything you can handle for long term. And then still, that's the big problem. And something we didn't touch on in this discussion, mentioning dopamine, is that dopamine is something that makes you anticipate the future, look forward to the future. And if you don't have dopamine, if you get super stimulated with dopamine in your environment, or the substances you take in, or the things that you're doing around you, social media, drugs, alcohol, whatever you want to, whatever the source is, if you do too much of it, your body, or your biological system, your brain and your body, will eventually adapt to those high levels. So it'll become, I don't know if the right word's sensitized or desensitized, but basically
desensitized.
Okay. So yeah, your body's used to getting at this big level, so it shuts down the receptors and it doesn't produce as much, because it's like, we don't need to, this is too much. And then if you take away that stuff in the environment, you take away the social media, you take away the pornography or whatever, all of a sudden the sources of that were triggering all this ridiculous amounts of dopamine are now taken away. You need to give your body, that goes back to this idea of acclimatizing yourself to these new environments or these new habits. And I don't even, it may not even be the anxiety, we both refer to it as anxiety in changing these habits, but it may have to do with the fact that your dopamine is not being stimulated. And
no, you have a great point. That's a good point. And that's why I recommended, like, when you're burnt out on these positive habits, like, is to take some time off of the dopamine intake. Like,
right.
when I've just consumed, like, okay, after I went on this podcast and talked about sort of the porn addiction culture, I became obsessed with researching anti-porn views and pro-porn views. And it was like, there was a glut of that kind of stuff on YouTube, like former porn actresses talking all about it. And then, different political groups talking about their reasonings for it. And I mean, so much of this was incredibly compelling to me. I went on like a huge binge. I probably watched 8 to 10 hours a day of content and reading and books. I mean, it was like, I would wake up in the morning and that's the first thing I wanted to do. It was literally a binge. Like, I was like, it's like I just discovered a gold mine of like food, like donuts and sweets everywhere. And I just like gorged myself on it. And then afterward, I was so full, I had to turn off all of my electronics and be like, oh my God, my brain is filled to the brim. And I got accustomed to that level of like inspiration. It was almost like I was inspired too much, if that's ever a possibility. And then the moment I was like run out, I was like, God, I need to get inspired again. I don't know what's going to happen to me if I don't get inspired again. Like, got to keep the flow going, like it's an addiction to like being inspired. It's and that's
it's an addiction to not being addicted.
Yeah, an addiction to being addicted, right?
Well, no, you were talking about breaking free of it and learning about how to break free of something you were addicted to, or
Oh yeah.
So you can actually get addicted to the process of becoming not addicted to something else. I mean, I hear you, man. I mean, it's,
oh boy, we just gone off complete meta right there.
Yeah, right. Well, we've been talking for a while. I think maybe we should think about, maybe some more concrete things we can recommend to people.
Yeah, it's a good let's close it out with some good concrete recommendations. And I think a lot of the stuff we were getting into in the past 15 minutes are like really awesome stuff for more episodes, I think. So, George, what kind of tips do you have? Like, I think building habits is probably the most productive thing. Like, what are some of the most effective habits that you feel like someone could take if they're going to start adding something new? Like, what can someone do today, tomorrow?
Well, like I mean, as I said before, as crazy as it might sound to some people, when you get up in the morning, brush your teeth, right after that, start making the bed. Now, like you said, you might not be able to do that. Find something small like that to do, something that is super easy to do, requires no special talents or skills, requires no willpower, requires no, very little effort. The idea here is to have a success first thing after you wake up. That doesn't require very much effort or time or anything. So it doesn't really, I don't even know if it really matters what it is. It could be, like you said, folding a blanket on the couch that you sleep on every night before you go to bed or something like that. But I really believe that that changed a lot for me because like I said, it doesn't, you have to do it too. You can't just like think about, oh, that sounds stupid. Just do it for 30 days, see what happens. Because for me, what it did is it triggered me to say, like I said before, they say this is what happens, and I didn't notice this consciously, but supposedly that little success builds a little bit of self-esteem, and then that feeds back into doing it again, and then you want to keep that habit up. So you keep doing it, and then the whole thing feeds into itself, and then from there you start saying, "Oh, I'm the kind of a person that makes these positive changes," and you want to keep that identity going and whatever. So it definitely has a snowball effect. And that's that thing that I just said is a good. It's a good way to approach it too. Is that your goal is not necessarily always to what you want to do is become a person who makes changes, who makes improvements. So that's really your ultimate goal is not to, get too, I read a great article the other day and coincidentally overlap with some stuff that I've been writing down for a blog post of my own. But this guy talked about how a lot of times people have goals. Let's say, for example, a lot of people, it's a big one is running a 5K. That people want to run marathons and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they pick this goal, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm going to train really hard and do this," and they do it and they make it happen. But what happens is that once they accomplish that goal, there's no goal. So their habits those positive habits that they had established for that specific goal, that specific milestone, they don't have a place anymore. So, that's why I think things like the small things like making the bed is what you're doing is you're turning yourself into somebody who does these kind of things. That makes it easier to do more of them. So, the other tip that I have is something that I've recently come up with. Another post that I'm been taking notes for to work on is it comes a little bit from the procrastination podcast that I really enjoyed. It's called I Procrastinate, like iPhone. Terrible name, but a really interesting podcast by a scientist. But he has a phrase where he says, "Just get started." And it's not just do it. And he's very specific about just get started because do it means you have to accomplish something and it has to be done, and forget that. What you want to do is just get started. Do a little bit of whatever it is you want to accomplish. Break it down into very, very tiny accomplishable chunks. So if you want to exercise, and this is something, the take that I have on it is that I've noticed that all it takes for me is maybe 3 to 5 minutes doing something, and not even all the time, or it doesn't always take that long. But really, after 5 minutes, I'm almost always into whatever I want to do. So if I don't want to meditate, I'm like, I will just do it for 2 minutes. And then after 2 minutes, I'm allowed to quit. And almost always you find that once you get into it, then that's the thing you don't want to stop doing. And what you didn't want to, the reason it wasn't that you didn't want to meditate, it was that you didn't want to stop whatever it was you were doing before, whatever it was. It doesn't matter what it was. It's the change in state that you're trying to avoid, not the actual activity that it takes place. So
Yeah, right.
the two tips would be small, 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 small. Start very small, very mundane. Don't try to accomplish anything big. Your goal is to be a person that does these things and makes these changes. And then the second one is just to get started doing it. If you have a little bit of hesitation, just make it happen immediately. and give yourself an out. If it has to be 1 minute, I wanted to call it the 1 minute, the 1 minute, forget what the word I had for it, but whatever. If you just do it for a minute and then you could quit after that, do one push up, once, one rep of whatever it is, one sentence or paragraph or whatever, but just do one of them. And if you really want to give up after you've gotten started, then you're free to quit. You've accomplished it, but the goal is to really just is to put it into practice and get that activity going.
George, have you ever read The Slight Edge?
I think I did. It sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's like you're either taking the slight edge up or down, and it's filled with these small habits that are so easy to do, but they're also so easy not to do. You're like, it's just one push up. Why bother? Like, it's just 1 minute meditation. That's not even going to have an effect. What's the point? And then while you're battling all of this, all of your mental processing, like just over that point is what actually prevents you from doing it in the first place. All of this thinking. And if all you had to do was just one, think of how much resistance that eliminates. And what it does is it builds that self-esteem, that self-confidence, and that identity of like, I'm a person who follows through on what I say I'm going to follow through on.
Right.
I can change things. I can add stuff to my life. Yep. I can do whatever the heck I want. And that empowering feeling of just like.
Well, they say that if you want to start one of the things that I really suggest to everybody for anything you want to accomplish is to start going for daily walks. And because that was really hard for me to do at first. Now I'm like so into it. I just, go for super long hikes as long as I can now, but it was really hard for me to build that habit. And one of the things that I learned after I'd already established it was that, like you said before, put your shoes by the bed or your walking shoes, your running shoes, put them next to the bed or doing something, that you would see as soon as you wake up. But the other key was the goal is not to go for a walk. Your goal is to put your shoes on and walk out the door and get on the sidewalk. That is the only part of the goal that's what your goal is, not to go for a walk or for how long or how many miles, whatever. The goal is just to get to that. Like one of the woman who was writing the article said her goal is that she walks in the door of the gym. That's it. She doesn't have to go and do anything beside. That's the only goal she has, is that I walked in the door of the gym. And I think she might even have gone even further and said, as long as she gets once she tells the taxi cab driver, she was in, New York or whatever.
Yeah.
But once she tells the taxi cab driver to take her to the gym, then she's accomplished her goal. That's the goal, because everything from there will start cascading. So like, if you want to go for a walk, just walk 1 block or walk to your neighbor's driveway and then walk back. That's enough. That counts. And it's really important to start small with these things. It's important to not try to don't be a healthy your goal is not to be a healthy person. Your goal is to be, like you said before, your goal is to be somebody who makes changes, and you need those small victories in order to build on and make it easier the next time and make you more confident, but I tell you, man, the making the bed, and I wish there was a better one, because like the people that are, in a situation where they can't make the bed, I wish I had a better alternative to that, and I don't. But
no, that's a seriously good one, man. That's it, man. I'm going to do it.
It's so small, but you would be. It blew me away. I would really look back after doing it for 6 months. Like now, when I'm in a hotel room, I make the bed there because I don't want to break the streak. I'm like, it sounds ridiculous, but I make the bed at hotels. So,
Yeah, you don't have to make it like all super tight like they do, but
no,
if you want to, sure.
I don't even do that at home. I just make sure it's tidy. It's just a little bit organized. It's just not, I just rolled out of bed and got out of bed. Nope. Mm-hmm. It's just squared up a little bit. It's very, very much, it takes me literally 30 seconds to do it, 15 seconds. So it's not, these things don't have to necessarily be the goals that you want to accomplish in the long run. Those will come in time. If you're having troubles with them now, what you need to do is start becoming the person who can make changes in the habit, in the environment, and the behaviors. That's what your first goal is that. And once you've started doing that, both of us can attest to the fact that you really get, I don't want to say addicted, but you really you get a kick out of doing it and you want to do more and you want to challenge yourself with bigger things. And that stuff will come in time. You just have to stick with it through the boring parts at the beginning where you think nothing's happening or you're expecting results too fast. You have to keep a mind out for yourself in the future. Like, I'm doing this for myself in 6 months. And if you can try to aim for the future instead of the present, that helps out a lot too.
Yeah, and I think what I'll add to that is you start to build habits like the going for a walk one, like if and then say you add in a habit like journaling, okay, which is another huge one that I think that I would recommend, and meditation. If you wanted to do that, that seems like a lot of habits, but like you start to once you get into the habit of becoming a habit maker, you can start to pick and choose which ones do I want to try to put into my life, which new things or rituals do I want to do, and I think that like when you do walking and you do meditation, you start to tap into your subconscious. If you're out walking and you're not listening to music or an audiobook, you're giving yourself all the space and time. So what happens is inspiration will start to come into you. You'll start to get ideas for projects that you want to start, for bigger goals like running a 5K, or like the possibility of traveling to a country or overseas that you've never done that before. Like, whoa, where are those coming from? Those start to percolate into your mind. And then for your journaling, you're writing all this stuff down. You're writing about what happened that day. You're keeping track. You're kind of you're turning yourself into a person who's more aware of what's happening to them and how the choices that they make are actually are having an effect on you. And so then you get these projects that could now become bigger goals for yourself, like running that 5K or, writing a novel, writing a book or something like that. And then those you've already have success breaking down into small habits. So you're like, okay, I can just write one sentence a day and I'll get the book out. Because it's not about getting the book out, really. It's about becoming a person who writes,
Right.
And I think, yeah, it's just that. So that's where it can go with this. And then I guess ideally is you should be where it will go long term. This is kind of just where I'm at right now, is you strip away everything that that doesn't serve you in your life, and you're able to create the life that you want, like one small little change at a time, so that way your day is what you want to make, rather than you're being controlled by every outside force. You're just kind of reacting like a little pinball machine.
Well, the other thing too is you might, one of the things that's tough to deal with along all this stuff is that you may not realize who you really are. Like, you may not be who you think you are. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Things change. And when like you said, when you start making decisions for yourself, you may go, because it's easy to go, well, I don't have time for all this stuff. It's like, I used to think the same thing. How am I going to do all this stuff? I don't have time for this. And what happens is you're like, I'm not the guy that I used to be, because I don't think I was that person. And a lot of those old things that took up that time, those all started they just did disappear, when you start having different priorities. So, now I agree with everything that you said. I think some of that stuff can be a little bit daunting if people are just starting out with this stuff, though. I think
right.
Small, like, I almost want to say the stupider the better, like the smaller, the more mundane and seemingly meaningless is almost as crazy as it sounds. Like, let that stuff be what you start with. Now, what you're saying about, I totally agree with all the rest of that stuff. I think all that stuff is 100% right on the money, but something meditation can be tough for people. A lot of people struggle with that in general. Some people might have an aversion to that concept. They may have misconceived notion about what there's a lot of,
totally, absolutely.
So that's a tricky one for people.
We'll talk about that in a future podcast.
Right. But nobody has a problem with making the bed. You know what I mean? That's one of the things I love about making the bed, is because it's non-denominational. You know what I mean? There's nothing going on there besides just make the bed, and it could be an opposite one, and it could be the one that I do at night, is just keep the dishes clean make sure that you don't go to bed without with any dishes in the sink.
Yeah. Leo Babauta says, clean your bowl.
It's perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, it's because, as ridiculous as it sounds, I enjoy washing the dishes now. And it sounds really stupid to say, but I was talking to my buddy like last week over dinner, and, he's family and work and blah, 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 super busy. And, I told him, he he's like, I don't have time for a lot of this stuff. And he's on this path that, him and I kind of started this together, and his responsibilities just drift him away from it. But I told him, I says, I've just made time to wash the dishes because it's enjoyable. I like being a part of the process of my meals from beginning to end as much as I possibly can. So that's a whole different topic, but you don't know where washing the dish, keeping your keeping your bowl clean by the end of the night, every night, you don't know where that's going to lead yet. There's going to be things that, like you said, now you could use meditation and journaling later on to explore this stuff. But I think even just washing the dishes and making the bed, the old Zen saying of chop wood and carry water, I think those things can lead you to some places if you do them regularly and become that person who does these things regularly that might surprise. I mean, they surprise me. So I doubt that I'm all that unique,
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to end the episode. Chop the wood, carry the water, make the bed. I think those are perfect small things for the listener to take away. So I think that about wraps it up. What do you think, George?
Yeah, I think that's good, Jeff. I'm another good episode, man. A lot of stuff to think about after we talk, which is what I really enjoyed about the last one as well. So
yeah, I can't wait to listen to it again as I edit, because there's a lot of things that we talked about that I want to note for myself to take in, and I want to make some good detailed show notes and stuff like that. So everything that we talked about is going to be in the show notes if you want to check that out. Makermistaker.com. And you can follow me on Twitter, Jeff_Finley. And we got George, he's at G Coghill. And thanks again for listening to another episode of the Maker Mistaker podcast, where we get real deep, real fast into some awesome topics about life and self-improvement and personal development, all that kind of crazy stuff. So can't wait to see you guys on the next episode. Until then, take it easy, live consciously.